Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Bonsoir tout le monde et bienvenue. It's an honor to gather with you tonight for our 9th Black History Month opening ceremony hosted by the Equity team in the Office of the Provost and Executive Vice-President Academic. Thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Linda Belimo. I'm a member of the Equity team and the Black History Month Planning Committee, and I'm honored to be your host this evening. Tonight, we have the distinct pleasure of welcoming our keynote speaker, architect Shane Laptiste, the principal and co-founder of the award-winning studio of contemporary architecture, also known as SOCA. As a Montrealer and a McGill graduate, and now an instructor at the Peter Guo-hua School of Architecture, he's the perfect match as our BHM keynote this year, and we're so thrilled to celebrate this full circle moment with him. Mr. Laptiste's keynote lecture is titled Reframing Spatial Narratives, Localizing Blackness and the Built Environment. As we come together today to learn and celebrate Black history, we must pause to reflect on the history of this environment, where we exist as students, community members, staff, and faculty. We gather here in Tiohtià:ke, situated on the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka. They have stewarded and protected this land for millennia and continue to do so, making our lives here possible today. I extend my deepest gratitude to them today, tomorrow, and always. Given the spotlight of architecture tonight, we must re-acknowledge that McGill University was built and established with the unpaid slave labor of Black and Indigenous people. As an African person, I see no separation in our collective struggles for decolonization, emancipation, and healing, particularly in these times of heightened fear and feelings of powerlessness. But how do we remind ourselves of our collective and personal strengths? How do we continue to stay in solidarity and in community with each other? These are the questions I ask myself often, and just being gathered here tonight is one way that I hope can uplift us all in these times. Black History Month is a reminder of our power and our resilience and our brilliance that's unshakable, undeniable, and literally the foundation of our spaces today. So though we celebrate Black History Month institutionally for the 9th year, we know that Black people have long been here, celebrating, resisting, organizing, and innovating in so many ways. I want to credit and thank all the Black people who came before us and who made way for this present moment. Thank you to the Black pioneers and present-day leaders at McGill who remind us of our strength and inspire us to push boundaries. Because of you, I'm able to stand here today and show up as my full self. In particular, I'd like to thank the Dr. Kenneth Melville Black Faculty and Staff Caucus, the Working Group for McGill's Action Plan to Address Anti-Black Racism, the Black Employee Resource Group, and the McGill Black Alumni Association. To all the Black student associations, with special mention of the Black Student Network and the McGill African Student Society, thank you for all you do to organize and bring Black students together. Thank you to the Faculty of Engineering and the Peter Guo-hua School of Architecture for their partnership this year. And a special thank you to Dean Vivian Yajo and Professor David Theodore for your support and active presence in bringing tonight's event together. The faculty and school's commitment to equity work ought to be recognized as they continue making great strides, notably through the Engineering Inclusivity, Diversity and Equity Advancement Team and their initiatives. Tonight's event would not be possible without the tireless efforts of many. To everyone who coordinates logistics, cleans our spaces, cares for our young ones, you're the backbone of tonight's success. Your work does not go unnoticed, and we thank you for all you do. Thank you to the production team here at the School of Music for sharing this space with us, and the multimedia team at McGill for live streaming to people watching at home. Thank you to Chef Sean and his team for the delicious food at our reception. He's a preferred vendor at McGill Marketplace, and we encourage you to continue supporting a Black-owned business across campus beyond the month of February. To the university's communication team, with special mention of Sylvie Barbaric, thank you for amplifying our message with the wonderful help of Tamaya Savage, who created our wonderful visuals tonight. Yeah, I think that deserves it. And thank you so much to Nicolas Debros, our event photographer, for capturing these moments so beautifully, and special credit to you for making melanated skin glow. And I want to also thank my amazing colleagues. I really work with the most dedicated and patient and kind team, and I want to do a big shout out to Shanice Yard, Antoinette Henry, Shannon Wood, Antoine Samuel Moufette Alavo, Charlene Lewis Sutherland, Tamaya Savage, Darcy Singh, and Camille Georges. You guys, you're the best. I feel so lucky to work with you all. Thank you for your dedication, your patience for the months of planning, not knowing what Teams chat to put where, scattered messages everywhere. So just thank you all for your amazing work. So I want to end with this. Black History Month reminds us that the work we do is not a sprint, but a marathon. And as we celebrate, let's also remember the importance of rest, reflection, and solidarity. Together, we continue making strides towards equity and justice, not just this month, but every day. And with that being said, it's my absolute pleasure to now invite Assistant Professor at the Schulich School of Music and Senior Cultural Advisor, Professor Rob Spade, to officially open our ceremony.
Miigwech. I'd like to introduce myself in my language. Bonjour. Gishago the name the Dijnakas, the main the dotem, Ubak Makong the doji. Miigwech. Inogishigat. My name in my language, it means heaven man. I'm from the Sturgeon clan. Our clan is the oldest teaching clan on the planet. And it wasn't until recently, last few years, I've been given permission to share that with the people. My culture has been, there's been a lot of work and efforts to get rid of it. Works to assimilate, and so we've faced these couple governments with very big budgets, and they've made our instruments illegal, our songs illegal, our customs illegal at times. But my culture is based on science. The language is all about science. Science is the way that a human being interacts with our universe. So maybe in the olden days, somebody might have mistaken me and called me medicine man. But I've been training since I was born. When I was young, we lived in the bush, northern Ontario. My parents, and I learned when I was hung in a tree we call Tikanagan, and I was bound, and I watched my parents work. They made things from the forest. The mind is so powerful. We have to be careful what we utilize in that mind. There are many things, many fascinations, but we have to have discernment. We need to gather wisdom. I was taught to see belief. And when I see the people here, my community members, I could tell you're all believers. I can see it. I was taught that. But I was also taught to explain to the people, how do we see these things? I've worked all across North America and in Europe, and it's hard for me to believe that nowadays, our voice is heard, our teachings. They're the original teachings on earth. My language is an original language of earth. We've kept it. I would never sell it. I would never give it up. There's nothing on earth. I don't want any cars. I don't want any money. I don't want fame. Nothing replaces the value my ancestors left me, because life is hard no matter where we come from. We can be rich, poor, live on the street, or in a mansion. Life is hard. Our ancestors tried to leave us the tools to negotiate those hard days. When life is good, we don't think about these things until it gets hard. What are we going to do? Prayer is easy. I'm going to interpret. Faith is easy. We were born with it. No matter where we come from on earth, we were born with that. We all spoke the same language. We cried. When you were small, you cried for your parents, your caregivers, for love. To be changed, to be fed, picked up. We all spoke that language. That's the human being's original language, is crying. We've gotten more sophisticated. Our first year in the world, we're half human and half spirit. We come from a place where science doesn't understand Western science. Where does life come from? Oh yeah, they see these things hit and then it divides, it keeps growing, and nobody knows why or where that came from. Life is a gift. It's very precious. You're all precious. We have to always remember that and endure, no matter what we do. And that's how we preserve and honor the memory of our ancestors. Native people in North America are proud of our parents. If you make the mistake asking me about my parents, boy, you're ready for a long story. I'm proud of my parents and what they've endured for me, my grandparents, and we're taught to go back 4 generations because that's 30 people there, 30 people that you can rely on. Nobody can ever take those away from you. These books, Mois and I, again, these books that we read, we're in education. After 5-10 years, they throw this away because they got a new one now. Oh, this is more fancy. This is how we're going to act now. This is the best way now, And then that's gone, ripped out. Once you got that down, now it's different. That's not a foundation for life. This education here, these are valuable tools for now. Foundation is where we're from, our parents. Those stories, creation stories. The world, the universe, so vast. In each and every one of us exists yes and no, duality, lives in harmony in each of our heart minds. The world is vast. We don't all have to agree. The world is mysterious. It's a wondrous place. If somebody has a way that you don't understand, it's okay. When I was 18, you see, I knew everything. Now that I'm getting a little older, I feel like I know less and less as I go along. We came in, these colors in this white, yellow, red, and black. We use these colors because these are the colors of the minerals at the base of a mountain where we go and fast every year. We go up in the mountain, we fast, and at the base of that mountain, the paints are made yellow, white, black, and red. And we use them for marking, deeds in our life. That's where these colors come from. The eagle, we use it because that bird flew the highest. So high, our eyes can't see it anymore. And people wonder, what are they doing up there? Why do we use the eagle feather? We have many, many stories. This drum, my language, you call it a drum. It means the heart way, the way of the heart. The first time we heard a heart was when we were inside our mom. We were growing. We were nurtured We were looked after. We were loved in the natural way, the natural law. We learn from our moms that we need rhythm in life. Every day we need to eat, sleep. We need to become familiar. We need to study. We need to build. The yellow is the east direction, represents spirit and birth and babies. Next is red, represents the emotion. As we get older, we become emotional people. In teenage years, it's a very difficult time. Our hearts, our passion. One day we have children. We have to live for somebody else. That's parents, who represents the body. And then one day our children have children. We become grandparents. Gokam. Nokamis. Mishumis. We become the mind. Our elders are our mind. They've been through everything we've gone through. We're only human beings. Anybody older than me is my elder, no matter where you're on from earth, because you've been through things that I'm going through today. I'm going to sing this song. What are the lyrics? The lyrics are vocables like way, ya, hey. They represent the time when we cried. Wah. How do we build faith? We've been using it all this time, all our life. Every time we hoped for something in our life, that was a prayer. Every time we wondered something in our life, that's a prayer. Every time when you applied to McGill, you made that vision happen. You ended up being a student, going through it. Your vision came true. You made it happen. Your spiritual journey, you've been doing it all this time, your whole life. In my culture, we have no gurus. We just have people that encourage one another. I can only encourage you. I can't tell you what to do. When we come into a room, our faith, this is how I know that we are all faithful people here. We come in any old room, we sit on any old chair. We don't even look at the specs. Can it hold my weight? Who made it? Where's it from? No, we just sit down in any old chair. Because we're all believers. We believe that, we have faith. We need to have faith every single day as we negotiate the streets here in Montreal. Finest drivers in North America. I'd like to share this song, and this song is about our ancestors, no matter where we're from. We're part of natural law. Everything that you see in your life and in every day that you have, it's for you. Don't forget that you're connected. That bird is there for you. That sun, that cloud, it's all there to tell you something. You got to remember and interpret these things for yourself. Choose the things that make you powerful and they enhance your gifts that you are born with. Choose those things. The other ones, don't waste your time. That's for somebody else. Be yourself. I believe that's what our ancestors wanted for us. To discern, to live a truthful, a learning journey. Life is mysterious. we sing our songs in 4s, but that's sung in 3 because we're going to continue that, living that way of finding out, we each have purpose and place, and that's what we should. We don't waste your imagination on worry, let it come, then deal with it. You have those tools. You spend that time alone, in what they call prayer, asking for help. Ask for help in the morning time. Ask for help in the ones that you love, your colleagues. Ask for help. Sometimes we don't have it because we don't ask. We don't have that courage. But we cannot make courage bigger if we don't have fear. So if you're feeling that fear, then I think you're on the right path to make that courage bigger. So that's this opening for Black History. That song is a prayer. It says things that we don't know how to say in any of our languages. It comes from each and every one of us, soul and spirit, asking for the good life. Mino Gish, it's a beautiful day today. Mino Bamatsawen is a beautiful life, it means. That song is where all together, when you heard this song, there was no spectator. You were part of that song. You remember that when you were crying, when you were a little baby. We're going back to those days, that purity, honesty, every day. So Miigwech, thank you for the invitation. I wish you a learned month. We learn, we grow, we continue that way for the rest of our days. Many blessings to you. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Professor Spade. Something that stuck with me, there's a lot that stuck with me, but don't waste your imagination on worry. That part really got me. And I think when you're naturally somebody that worries a lot, that message is quite, it got into me really well. So thank you so much for being here and opening our ceremony today. And I'd like to welcome the Director of Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, the leader of our team, Tynan Jarrett, to share a few words.
Welcome, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here with you tonight. To our keynote speaker, thank you so much for agreeing to be here among us. We're very much looking forward to this talk. I wanted to speak briefly about the importance of McGill's annual Black History Month keynote in relation to my role as Director of Equity and Diversity in the Office of the Provost. I think many of us here today will agree that although February is Black History Month, there is an institutional imperative to recognize, uncover, and highlight Black history, to celebrate Black excellence and achievement, to support Black thriving, and to struggle against all forms of anti-Black racism every month of the year. Our Black History Month celebrations are one small but important part of this ongoing work. My wonderful colleague Linda mentioned that this is the 9th year that McGill is officially marking Black History Month at McGill. 9 years is both long and short. I think about that as I try and calibrate and find the right way to express my pride about the work that's been done in a way that doesn't underestimate the extent and nature of the work that remains. The accomplishments led by the dedication, talent, and ongoing hard work of Black faculty, staff, and students are truly impressive and wide-reaching. Of course, this work long predates the institutional commitment. At the same time, 9 years is a drop in the bucket in the timeline of an institution that is 203 years old. A little less than 5% of its existence. So in these troubled and troubling times, it's more important than ever that we reaffirm our commitment to the work of actively combating anti-Black racism within and beyond our campus community. In this spirit, I wanted to let you know that the Provost, who unfortunately could not be here with us tonight, has indicated that he is planning soon to communicate with the entire McGill community about his decision to extend the life of the current action plan to address anti-Black racism by 2 years, with a view to, in the second of those 2 years, relaunching a formal consultation process with leadership and engagement from McGill's Black communities to develop our thinking around what comes next. So all that to say, if you see me taking a lot of notes tonight, you know why. Our action plan is shaped around 5 axes, one of which is physical space. And even just reading the abstract of the talk and the title of the talk for tonight, I know that we're going to be drawing a lot of inspiration, ideas, and have great discussions about what comes next. So I'm so looking forward to it. I'd like to give one more round of applause, please, to the fabulous organizing committee in the equity team, led by Linda and Shanice. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tynan. I hope to be half the writer you are one day. Thank you so much, as always. Please join me next in welcoming President of the National Society of Black Engineers, the McGill chapter, Dami Bali.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dami Bali. I'm a U2 pharmacology student here at McGill and the current president of the National Society of Black Engineers, or NSBE for short. It's an honor to be a part of tonight's evening. Before I begin, though, I want to extend a major thank you to today's organizers for putting together this event and giving me the opportunity to speak to you all tonight. During my time at McGill, I found myself drawn to initiatives that foster inclusivity and celebrate diverse perspectives, because coming in as a first-year student, I was very unsure because I didn't know anyone in Montreal, so I tried to find my people. And that led me to join the National Society of Black Engineers. In my first year, I ended up being the Vice-President of Events, so I was planning a lot of similar events to this. But now I'm fortunate enough in my third year to be president of this club. We were founded in 2005, and our mission has been, and always will be, to increase the number of culturally responsible Black STEM students who excel academically, succeed professionally, and positively impact the community. To that end, we aim to support these students through various initiatives, from professional development workshops to networking events, and providing academic support through study groups and our flagship mentorship program. We're also investing in the future of Black STEM here in Montreal by expanding our mentorship program to Cégep students to try and assist them in their application to schools like McGill and encourage their pursuit of STEM studies. As well, we also host our Walk for Education event, which is a grassroots program designed to inspire kids from grades 6 to 12 to pursue higher education and interest in STEM fields. I would also like to take this time to extend a special invite to our Black Legacy Dinner on February 19th. This event offers a unique opportunity to connect with students, network with leading professionals from various industries, and celebrate the achievements of the Black community. Our theme and the focus of the night is reaching beyond boundaries and igniting imagination. It's inspired by Dr. Mae Jemison, the first Black female astronaut, who said, "Never be limited by another's limited imagination." A statement that I believe is extremely relevant in today's climate. The dinner will be held in the Smooth Ballroom from 6:30 to 8:30, and I encourage you all to join us. And you can find more information about it on the NSBE social media, our LinkedIn, or our website. Moving beyond my work with NASB, I'm deeply passionate about reclaiming spaces and designing for collective futures so that we can see more of us in the community. That's why I'm excited to announce a new project that I've been working on with the wonderful eIDEA team. It's called Projection 2, where we are looking to bring Afro-Caribbean art to the walls of McGill. By showcasing Afro-Caribbean creativity and heritage, we're not only enhancing our campus visually, we're enriching it culturally. And by doing so, we can create spaces where Black students feel welcome and a space where Black students can feel that they can come to. The exhibition is expected to launch in fall 2025, and it will be in the Trottier building, so look out for that. Tonight, however, we have the distinct privilege of hearing from Shane, an architect and scholar who explores how architecture was once used as a form of colonialism, but now can be used as a form of empowerment for the Black community. Shane's focus on reframing these spatial narratives in the built environment provides valuable insights into how we visualize what Black spaces look like and what they represent in the modern day. It's a unique opportunity to learn from a leading scholar and to deepen our understanding of these critical issues. I encourage you all to actively engage with Shane's lecture and to fully participate in the Q&A session afterwards. Thank you for being here tonight, and I'm confident that it will be a stimulating and thought-provoking evening. Let's embrace the insights shared and continue these important conversations beyond this event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dami. We really look forward to the legacy dinner that will be hosted by NASB very soon. And everything you said was immaculate. Thank you. Please join me in welcoming next the Black Affairs Commissioner of the Student Society of McGill, Claire Mabia.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Claire Mabia, a final year nursing student, and I'm honored to stand here before you today, once again, as the Black Affairs Commissioner at the SMU, representing Black student leaders. I'd like to begin by first extending my gratitude to the Black History Month Planning Committee, the Office of the Provost, the Executive Vice-President Academic, and all the other incredible partners who've helped make this celebration possible. I must admit, when I was invited again this year, I was a bit nervous because I thought I'd fumbled through my speech last year, but I was like, I must have done something right if they ask me back again this year, so thank you for welcoming me again. It's hard to believe it's already been a year. Time really flies when you're balancing assignments, placements, and pretending to have it all together. But in all seriousness, McGill has been a journey of growth, learning, and community. From my first year with the Black Student Network as the first-year rep, I quickly realized just how powerful it is to have a space where we, as Black students, can come together to learn, grow, and support each other. From that moment on, my commitment to supporting this community truly deepened. Going on to serve as the Vice President of Internal Affairs, still with the BSN, that allowed me to remain in a space where I can continue to do just that. Now, as the Black Affairs Commissioner, I have the privilege of continuing that work by advocating for and promoting equity across the student community. One important aspect of this role is chairing the SMU's Black Affairs Committee, where we have representatives from the various student groups like BSN, MAS, NASB, ASSA, and BVA, and more. Through this committee, we've been able to oversee the administration of the Black Equity Fund, which supports events for both groups and individuals, as well as my favorite part, meeting needs at the student level. I'm also grateful through this role to be able to be part of this writing of the SMU's first Black student policy, forming the new Black Affairs website that we hope to serve as a central space for resources and materials, while also supporting new student groups and other student initiatives that aim to bring community together. As I reflect on my time at McGill, Black student advocacy at the university has come a long way. Just looking at initiatives like the Pick Your Path program, which I'm honored to be a mentor for this year, and events like this one, I'm reminded of the importance of both looking back and looking forward. And while we reflect, we must also continue to push for spaces, resources, and recognition that Black students truly deserve. This year, I'm excited to be part of several initiatives that showcase the diverse and dynamic experiences of Black students at McGill. I'm looking forward to the MAS's ASE conference, BSN's Beauty Day and Soul Food, NASB's Legacy Dinner, and much more. One highlight this month will be the Community Gathering Day, which will bring together students and local Black-owned businesses, nonprofits, and faculty for a macroplace, a space that allows supporting the community beyond campus. The theme of this year's opening ceremony is truly special, as it will feature a keynote by Shane Laptiste. I'm excited to hear his thoughts and perspectives he will bring to the discussion, and his journey as a Black architect is an inspiration and serves as a reminder of the importance of representation in every field. As we continue to honor the contributions of Black communities, both past and present, I encourage all of us here tonight to keep engaging in these conversations and to remember that Black history is not confined to just 1 month of celebration. It is a year-round commitment to community, breaking barriers, and education. I'm truly excited to see where the events of this month will take us, and I can't wait to engage with hopefully all of you during the performances, panel discussions, and various events throughout February. Thank you once again for allowing me the privilege of being here today and for the ongoing support of Black students at McGill. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. Of course, we will invite you back to speak. And thank you for all your support for the community gathering, which will be on February 19th. We'll share more details later for Black students, staff, and faculty. Next, I'd like to invite Professor David Theodore, the director of the School of Architecture, to welcome our keynote for this evening.
So, sometimes you just have a great year. In 2023, tonight's keynote speaker won the Emerging Architectural Practice Award from the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada. 15,000 registered architects in Canada, one winner. So that's not a bad win. In 2023, the Canada Council for the Arts also awarded him the Prix de Rome in Architecture Professional, maybe even better. And then he was chosen by the curators of the Canada Pavilion to show the Little Jamaica project representing Canada at the 2023 Architectural Biennale in Venice, Italy. That's a good year. What's especially exciting about all that is he won these awards working closely with his partner, Tura Cousins-Wilson. The two co-founded the Toronto-based architecture firm Studio of Contemporary Architecture half a dozen years ago. And 2020, they were also together founding members of BETA, the Black Architects and Interior Designers Association. So that's a community organization dedicated to the future of Black architecture and design. So I say their partnership is exciting because, as you will hear tonight, our speaker walks the walk. For him, the creation of architecture involves inclusion and collaboration. Community, community, and community. It's also, though, a moment maybe to celebrate our speaker himself. We go a ways back. I was a part-time adjunct professor in the school when I had the pleasure of working with him on the final project for his master's degree in architecture. So all of you in this audience won't be surprised to learn that he proposed a cultural center for the African diaspora in downtown Montreal. So you wouldn't be surprised. Yay. So you're here, you wouldn't be surprised, but boy, it was often difficult to generate positive discussion with peers and among visiting critics. Like, I was thinking about this, I won't say he found his voice in architecture with that project, but he certainly found a way to look for it. So, what is the connection between Black identity, architecture, and community? I invite you to take a moment to reflect on how architecture does what architecture does. Montreal-based firm Saucy and Perrot Architects designed the hall we're in today to support communities like ours gathering together. So you may not think this is a beautiful room. I think it's pretty good. You may not think it's a functional room. Maybe people at the top had trouble getting there. But in either case, it's an example of the ambition that architects have for their work. So if in days to come, you're trying to make sense of this idea about how architecture and Black culture go together, you might start from thinking about our presence together inside of this building. And if you'll forgive a pun, from the outside, it's a very black building. So I couldn't resist. So I am the director of the Peter Guo-hua School of Architecture, but I am also here as a representative of the Faculty of Engineering. As part of this introduction, I've been asked to thank our speaker and, of course, all of you and all of the organizing committee on behalf of Dean Yargeau and the Faculty of Engineering. It's, as a director, I can tell you it's a very wonderful moment when you get such instant support for collaboration from the Dean. And I am also a faculty advisor for the McGill chapter of the National Society for Black Engineers, or NSBE. It's a student group, as you've heard, and the faculty has also been quick to support NSBE activities. And a quick shout out to the NSBE members. It's just a fantastic group, high energy, high motivation, and thank you for letting me be a part of it. So thank you to the Faculty of Engineering, and thank you on behalf of the Faculty of Engineering. It's an honor to take part in Black History Month. And just one more thing. Our speaker promotes what I learned as a student at McGill to call the integrity of structure. That is, his architecture testifies to the way the design and construction of a good building supports our hopes for a good society. We'll hear tonight about Black joy and about that peculiar ability of architecture as buildings and cities, both inside and out, to uplift, to transform, and to inspire. In that spirit of community and integrity, please welcome this year's keynote speaker for the opening ceremony of Black History Month, Shane Laptiste.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the introductions, and thank you for, it's a beautiful start to the evening. When I was asked to present, I considered a range of topics related to Black identity and architecture, and also just different ideas around a decolonial approach to architecture, reconsidering the way that architecture is practiced, the way that buildings are constructed, to the underrepresentation of Black professionals in architecture in North America, considerations of space, aesthetics regarding Black culture, and identity in the built environment, different approaches to architecture considerate of present and future impacts to diverse communities. And I decided to not choose anything and just go with a bit of everything. And I'll start with the context of where I'm presenting now, and most of the stories will actually be in this immediate area. It's a rendering of an early project that incorporates some work of my uncle, who's right there. But to start the story, I actually want to start with a family story. And it was I appreciate your introduction related to ancestors, as the story I'm going to begin with is my great-grandmother, who in 1922 sailed from Grenada, landing in St. John, New Brunswick, on her way to her destination of Montreal. She came to Montreal as a domestic worker, leaving behind my one-year-old grandfather. And she spent nearly 5 decades in Montreal, living in a range of housing, mostly adjacent to the St. Antoine neighborhood, now known as Little Burgundy. A largely Black area, Little Burgundy was a convenient neighborhood for Black rail workers to settle, being sandwiched between the Canadian Pacific and Canadian National rail lines, within blocks of each other of their eastern passenger terminals. Through mostly unwritten rules, it was also the one area that as a single black woman, she would have been able to obtain housing in Montreal. She worked for a family who had a house in Westmount and a summer house in Pointe Claire, at times when opportunities for employment for black women were limited both here and in the Caribbean. And from research from my uncle, that's where she, one of the places where she lived, just adjacent to Windsor Station. Her presence here supported her sister and subsequent generations to settle in Montreal, carving out new spaces and building community. In my family, for example, I have 3 generations before me who have lived here, and my generation is the first to be born here. I want to highlight the interconnection between Canada and the Caribbean in ways in which it has informed the considerations of space and the built environment in both regions of the continent. This personal history informs my exploration of black space in Montreal, its past, present, and future. And a couple of people in those photos are right here. So how does the evolving nature of Montreal's black community shape the city's spatial dynamics? How are the spatial experiences of community embodied today? The black community in Montreal was incredibly visible in certain spaces in the first half of the 20th century. This visibility, though, occurred primarily in 3 spaces: in wealthy domestic spaces, in the St. Antoine Ward or Little Burgundy, and on the train. Outside of these spaces, the black community was less visible, though still present. And I'll be exploring the traces that Montreal's black communities have established on the landscape in the past, present, and future, and exploring how these narratives are connected to broader discourse around black space and architecture. I'll also explore black space, representation, and architecture through historical and contemporary examples. My work explores a narrative approach to architecture rooted in black communities, acknowledging lived realities to create new environments for collective thriving. Many people have asked how I became interested in architecture. My journey actually started right around the corner. I was born just north of here at the former Royal Victoria Hospital. And as an enthusiastic Lego builder, you like that, Mila Ezra? I became aware of architecture when I was in elementary school after seeing a black architect on TV. I was inspired to become an architect and enrolled at McGill School of Architecture, being one of the few black students. Being one of the few black students, I encountered a certain invisibility of black agency in the shaping of space, as well as in a lack of recognition of the architecture of black cultures and communities historically and into the present. And not only black communities, also many communities from the Global South, indigenous communities not represented in what is considered the canon of architecture. I graduated, and not long after, I began my career in the profession in Edmonton, where I became a licensed architect. That was induction ceremony in Alberta. I'm currently based in Toronto, where I lead my own architecture practice, Studio of Contemporary Architecture, or SOCA. My studio co-founder, Tur Cousins-Wilson, and I, on stage there, independently started design practices in the summer of 2018, and within a couple of years, joined forces. And since that time, we've collaborated on numerous projects for municipalities, for homes, community spaces, community organizations, arts institutions, and especially we've had the opportunity to work with a lot of black community organizations in Toronto, Southern Ontario, Michigan, and here in Montreal. So architecture has often been used both as a tool of oppression, though also as a tool of empowerment. In exploring black space and visual culture, we not only use physical spaces to inform our work, we also use stories, histories, narratives, but also are informed by different materials from the African diaspora, like materials and fabrics and artwork and craft, and artists and music and culture and sculpture, and also architecture, were informed by historical works of architecture from the African diaspora, more contemporary works, as well as more recent projects. I'm sharing this quote from American architect Sekou Cook around space and the way that Black communities have appropriated space. From slave quarters and farm settlements in the American South to post-migration urban ghettos and slums in the Northeast to public housing projects throughout American cities, the predominant spaces of Black inhabitation in this country have been leftover, disposable, and characterless environments. But from these devalued spaces emerged some of America's most valuable cultural contributions: the blues, jazz, the Harlem Renaissance, and hip hop. The porch, the hallway, the stoop, the corner, each became a site for newly adapted and improvised social activity. And we often explore our work through three primary spatial and narrative signifiers in space that are relevant to the Black community. One idea is looking at the shell, which provides external protection and visibility for communities, the threshold, which is a liminal space of gathering and safety, and the hearth, which forms the heart of community and care. And the idea of each of these, so the shell may be at both a personal level, a building scale, or a city scale, and creates a sense of impenetrability. However, it also creates a sense of a presence, a face onto the world. The threshold, as exemplified by the porch, has a significant presence in many cultures throughout the diaspora. It is a space of gathering and safety. It is both functional climatically and creates a space of protection and gathering that is both private and open to the community. It is not always explicitly designed for the purpose of gathering, but spatially creates the ideal condition to do so. And the hearth, as a site of care, resilience, and empowerment, Black spaces have long been sites where alternative modes of care and community emerge. Spaces where the Black experience is reimagined outside of the power structures of racism. An act of spatial resistance, Black people creating self-sustaining spaces outside of dominant power structures. And these are often female-led spaces. And examples of these are the living rooms, kitchens, community spaces, and churches. This is a church from the late 19th century in Oakville, Ontario, Black church. Looking at Montreal in particular, the great Montreal-based historian Dorothy Williams has written, "Our history then is of a people whose history has been ignored, deliberately omitted, or distorted. By excluding Black history, especially the story of slavery, Canadians have distorted their own history. The writing of Afro-Canadian history realigns Canadian history." And I think through this, just thinking about how the different narratives, the different stories of different communities, how without their understanding, without their appreciation, really provides gaps in the knowledge of the stories that we tell of the place where we live. And this is actually my father, grandfather, and great-grandmother. But going back, understanding that the presence of Black communities intersects with and is layered onto historical narratives of other communities, fragments of Black urban life are woven into Montreal's broader urban history. There are several significant examples of the contested ways in which Black people have negotiated space in this city and have defined spaces for themselves and for their communities. These include, and jumping through centuries, these include the enslaved Marie-Joseph Angélique and her resistance and her conviction in the burning of a significant portion of Montreal in 1734. And an interesting thing spatially and architecturally is there's a series of major fires that then led to the change in building requirements in the city, requiring buildings to be built out of wood rather than stone. Sorry, built out of stone rather than wood. To the Sir George Williams affair, which included the occupation of space as a counterpoint to racist authorities. So spatial history, architectural history, not necessarily in the traditional sense of buildings, but understanding space and the occupation of space and the response to space in a different way. And now, thinking of architecture as a profession. From those who are marginalized from spaces of authority, the built environment, as mentioned earlier, can often be used as an instrument of control. And it's something that can amplify and promote segregation, exclusion, and surveillance. In architecture, I think one question is, a lot of people have a perception of what architecture is or what architects do. But it seems like a straightforward question, but it's actually not something that even as architects we're fully appreciate the nuances of. Architects definitely design buildings. However, there's also the balance of social, aesthetic, functional, economic, cultural, and environmental considerations that are key to the process. And it's impossible for that to be done from a singular viewpoint. So Scottish-Canadian curator, architect, Leslie Loco, has said, in architecture particularly, the dominant voice has historically been a singular, exclusive voice whose reach and power ignores huge swaths of humanity, financially, creatively, conceptually, as though he had been listening and speaking in one tongue only. The story of architecture is therefore incomplete, not wrong, but incomplete. And then, in terms of representation in the profession, despite the fact that in North America, the Black population is around 11 to 12%, only 2% of architects are Black or identify as African American in Canada and the US. And in the US, where there are actual statistics, which you don't have statistics in Canada, there have only ever been 450, or just over 400 Black female architects in the last 150 years of the profession. So another aspect of architecture is that it as a profession has been developed as a fairly elitist space with the myth of the singular, often white male visionary exerting his vision on the environment and communities. And within the late 19th century, the construction industry, the profession established itself, separating the white-collar jobs, the architects, from the blue-collar builders and the laborers. So look, it created this very strict distinction in terms of how labor was separated, how labor was arranged. And this framing of the profession has rendered the profession fairly homogeneous, and through the 20th century, with some notable exceptions, has excluded Black voices in North America. So I want to even zoom in a little more to local context and looking at some concrete examples of how architecture is related to broader themes of colonialism, trade, and other, and the extraction of labor. And looking at the McGill campus, and not even as a start, considering that James McGill himself owned Black and Indigenous slaves, is an interesting starting point. And in this image here, you have Peter Redpath. And as an understanding of how architecture informs the structures of trade, labor, materials, and the built form, there's an interesting story, not directly related to him, but adjacent. So the Redpath Museum on campus, the National History Museum on campus, was founded from money donated by the Redpath family, which derived its wealth from sugar, a sugar importer from the British West Indies. And they actually began in the 1840s after emancipation. And in one of the sources of the sugar, the significant source of sugar, Barbados, the workers who were recently emancipated could not own their land but they could own their own buildings. And this is actually an interesting example of architecture and design that created itself on a non-temporary basis, or non-temporary architecture. After emancipation, the slaves were still landless since most of the land was still owned by the plantations. Through an act in 1840, former slaves were allowed to build their homes on rented, marginally productive plantation lands, but the plantation owners reserved the right to evict tenants from these tenancies at short notice. Houses therefore had to be chattel, which means movable possession, and for this reason were built of timber so they could be easily dismantled and sectioned, moved to another spot on an ox cart, and reassembled in a single day. They also had to be strong enough to survive this upheaval with minimal damage. And their form was derived from a roof pitch informed by indigenous structures that could withstand both heavy rains and winds, including hurricane-force winds. As most of the island had been deforested in the 17th century to facilitate the arrival of slaves and sugar plantation economy, wood became, any long-standing forests were not available. And as ships of the mid-19th century would not travel a route empty, the trade between Canada and Barbados was one of bringing sugarcane to Canada, and on the return trip was Canadian wood. So most of the domestic spaces in the 19th century of these movable houses were built with this Canadian wood that was sized and manufactured to be placed on ships in a certain scale, and so that even the scale of the house, the form of the house, was both informed by the both ox carts, but also the ships going back and forth with sugar. So the architecture and the domestic architecture, the way the spaces that people inhabit, is not independent of other factors that inform community, that also inform the way that labor plays out. And back to something that David had mentioned, a thesis project when I was finishing my master's was a cultural center on St. Catherine and Mansfield. The site they chose was based on the idea of reclaiming space. On that site in the 1920s, at the Lowe's Theater, a Black patron came to the theater and sat on the lower in the lower seating area, and was told by the theater management that he had to leave his seat. So he contested that in court, and the court said that the theater owners had every right to do that, and the segregation was it was confirmed that segregation was allowed to be maintained in a public space in Quebec. And the project, going back a little while, the project explored different ways of creating a vibrant cultural hub, a space for exchange, artistic expression, and community support, hosting a range of cultural and community programs. And the idea was it would embrace pluralism, layered meanings, and drawing from diverse influences such as African fractal patterns, cultural symbolism, and color schemes, and references to the Black community's social historical experiences. And then the central area was both a site of memory and identity, but also served as a passive ventilation system with sustainability as a key concern. And this, as Dave mentioned, was a key point in my journey exploring the architecture of cultural and community spaces. Now, touch on some projects worked on with our firm, SOCA, SOCA. One of the projects that we've worked on recently with the artist I'm blanking on his name, I'm sorry. We collaborated with the artists on this project, and it was for a fountain in a public park just on the east end of Toronto. And the idea was that this fountain was Kurt Santiago is the artist. And the work was meant to honor the Black community that had lived in the area. And we explored this city directory from the mid-19th century that established all of the residents of Toronto and their trade and their address, and for Black people, their race. So a common thing's not surprising, but just the idea that in terms of visibility, that that indigeneity and Blackness are two races that have been codified in law in Canada and the Americas, and if you are not that, then there's a different system that has existed for you. So we looked at different sources, both Dame Lorraine Masquerade legends, looking at histories of civic fountains, looking at busts of from the 19th century and how those could be applied, and created this form that was informed by a diverse set of references and bringing them together into a singular vision. It's here. Another project that we worked on we're currently working on, which is in progress, is looking at supporting the investigation into a interpretive center for the Oro African Methodist Episcopal Church in Oro, Ontario. So Oro is right up here on the edge of what was the colony of Upper Canada. The colonial government in 1815 purchased some land from local indigenous communities and established, after the War of 1812, actually established a community for Black veterans of the War of 1812. And this is one of the few government-sponsored Black communities that existed in British North America, or the British Americas even. And the space was designed, the community, Oro, was designed for their settlement. So this is a map of Oro, and there were multiple reasons that the colonial government provided this community and at the far north edge of the colony. One was they were both worried about the relations with indigenous communities further to the north and also to the Americans, and wanted these Black War of 1812 veterans to serve as a buffer to the northern edge of the colony. And this, so a community was developed, several hundred residents ended up settling here, but the land was not well suited for agriculture. And however, later on, in 1849, a church was built, and the church structure is still standing and has been rehabilitated over the years, but Oro African Methodist Episcopal Church is a National Historic Site. It still stands on the site, and some descendants of the community. The community itself no longer exists. Most of the residents moved away by the 1920s. And however, many descendants had kept the building functional, and I said it was restored 10 or 15 years ago. And so we're working with an organization looking at creating an interpretive space that honors both the church and an adjacent cemetery. So there's an unmarked cemetery just adjacent, behind and adjacent to the church. So it's an in-progress project, but the history of that site is incredibly interesting. And another Ontario site, actually maybe we'll point it out here. So Toronto is here, and then Oakville is here, just on the shore of Lake Ontario. And there were a significant number of Black residents who had escaped slavery in the U.S. This was a very significant end to the Underground Railroad in the 19th century. And we're working with a group of descendants of one of those early settlers named Samuel Adams, who was a blacksmith in Virginia. And one of the interesting elements of this is metalwork and blacksmiths in West Africa were historically in West Africa were incredibly well regarded, as they held almost a spiritual power to turn soil into this useful material that could be used for many different functions. So it's actually similar to certain ideas of architecture in terms of this master builder, this person that creates something from the soil into a tool that the community can use. So metalwork and ironwork actually was brought over to the Americas through the slave trade, and there are significant instances, significant elements of metalwork in the Caribbean, in the southern U.S. from enslaved Black metalworkers. New Orleans especially has a significant quantity of metalwork designed by Black ironworkers. There are certain symbols, there's certain Adinkra symbols that are incredibly common in ironwork that you see in North America that is actually came through the slave trade and formed a certain element of communication. And I should have had an example of one, but a certain visual language that is carried through in art in the built environment is incredibly relevant that it has been maintained. So Samuel Adams was the ironworker from Virginia who came from a lineage of ironworkers and settled in Oakville in the early 1850s. And he established, he actually developed a tool. It's a metal rake called a stone hook, which was used to collect stones from the bottom of Lake Ontario. And those stones actually, up until reinforced concrete was developed in the early 20th century, so from the mid-19th century to the early 20th century, almost every structure in Ontario, in the Toronto area, from Toronto to Niagara Falls, was built upon the stones that were developed by Samuel Adams. So the foundation of a large portion of that area was built upon the work of a black iron worker. And so he built a house and formed a successful business, and some of the stones, then the house that he built was demolished in the around 15 years ago. And the descendants of Samuel Adams and the town had the foresight to collect a significant number of the stones from his house, from the foundation, and they are in a depot at the town. So we have, we're working on a memorial that incorporates both some rammed earth and the stones themselves, and uses some ironwork to create a monument to Samuel Adams and to early black settlers in Oakville. Another project, the Wild Sea Center for Arts and Activism in Toronto. It's the home of Black Lives Matter Canada. So we've been working with them, establishing a renovation to their existing space. And one of the things in looking at the building was that we came across the fact that in the 1950s, 2 doors down from the center, there was a Black-led organization in the 1950s founded by a recent Bajan immigrant, Donald Moore, and he created what's called the Don Avalon Center. And this whole strip of in downtown Toronto was originally settled by Eastern European Jewish immigrants, then later many Chinese immigrants, and it has always had an activist and progressive, it was always home to a lot of progressive organizations. And Donald Moore was extremely instrumental in pushing for the domestic workers scheme that allowed women from Trinidad, Barbados, and Jamaica to come and work as domestic workers in the early 1950s. So there was a gap, as I referenced earlier. My great-grandmother came in the 1920s. After the mid-1920s, there was essentially a restriction on Black immigration, and the domestic worker scheme was the first opportunity for, outside of people attending university, it was a very rare opportunity to allow Black immigration to Canada. So we layered on, explored, so this is the current building, and the color are the current and contemporary interventions with the Don Avalon Center, historical photo of the Don Avalon Center. Thinking about space, thinking about outdoor space, as I mentioned, like the threshold was an important consideration in this project. We are considering inclusivity and difference, community, the politics of care within the space. The Wild Seed Center is named for the novel Wild Seed by Octavia Butler. And Butler's work contests racist, sexist, and heteronormative hegemonies, champions queer, feminist, anti-racist constructions of family for their active resistance of oppression. And that was important for organization, as they have a significant desire to support all members of the Black community, but specifically those who are differently abled and queer communities within Black communities. So one of the design cues that we took when looking at the project was the main character of the novel, whose name is Anyanu. She was inspired by a legend in southern Nigeria, Onitsha, of this shapeshifter called Atubusi. And the idea of this shapeshifter was someone who helped her community, and when she died, a gate was created, or threshold was created by planting this tree, and there was a shrine that protected the community through the dedication of Atubusi's body being buried adjacent to this tree. So we were informed by the idea of creating this sense of protection and this threshold as you come into the space. That's an example of the wall of the Onitsha sense of enclosure. We're also working with a researcher from a group called the Radical Research Agency. Her name is Victoria McKenzie, who explored some ideas around the idea of protection and looking at the space from the idea of maroonage and the idea of the center itself being an architectural representation of the idea of maroonage. And maroons in slavery societies were communities that would escape slavery and create communities of their own in opposition to the adjacent slavery society. So looking at the project itself as grounded in decolonial methodology, bringing together Black feminist infrastructural guidance, pre-colonial African ways of being and building, and ecological sustainability. And so we're working through and even thinking about the project and how we imagine it. Asked my uncle, who created some sketches, some from the 1970s, creating some collages, looking at the interior of the building and how that could inform the design of the space. So we use rammed earth and some other, a lot of plantings, indigenous plantings throughout the site to really create a sense of welcome and openness, but also being rooted in the land. And the project has a future phase that's going to potentially expand the space to create a space for dance, a space for performance, and going to be extremely ecological, sustainable in that goal. This is an interior view. It's a lot of art sprinkled throughout. And the building itself was really an opportunity to showcase artists and artwork through the space. And then recently, we've had the opportunity to work with, and this is the 1950s or 60s, Jean Drapeau, the mayor of Montreal, with students, children from the NCC. And what's interesting about this is that the urban redevelopment schemes that came about under the leadership of Mayor Drapeau erased certain swaths of Little Burgundy, which eventually led to declining participation and ultimately led to the building's vacancy and collapse. So the NCC was a cultural center that was thriving throughout the mid-20th century. Here's a map of some of the approaches that the city was looking at to kind of demolish and recreate social housing throughout the neighborhood. So there's a lot of displacement of community. And the image on the right, it's a really interesting series of photographs where the workers from the city documented each building that was going to be demolished, both on the interior and the exterior, and notwithstanding whether it was in someone's kitchen and whether they were there or not as an act of defiance. But he was about to lose his home, and through this scheme, and many people were displaced as part of that process. But after the building, funding was lost after many years, and a wall ended up collapsing in 2014, and the building was demolished. And in 2022, the City of Montreal purchased the site and is supporting an initiative to create a new community center on the site. So over the last 3 years, I've been teaching a studio here at the School of Architecture, looking at how we can reimagine the site by being informed by community desires, community needs, and looking at ways of reinterpreting the architecture. So we created a website where all the student work is posted that looks, and the students did a significant amount of research into the site to understand the historical context and the current context of the neighborhood to create something based on the past, but designed to support future use. So we held workshops with students, and the students presented their work both to community groups. And this is actually just this week, another studio where we built a model, and we're hoping to share the site model with the students, with the community group, so they can use it as a resource for their future work. It's just a concept. So the design itself, the project itself, is in a very preliminary stage, and but the students are exploring different ideas and sharing them with the community group, so they could use the students' work as a resource to be informed by new ideas for the site. I think I'm way over time, but so want to look at or consider how can Black communities who have been displaced and marginalized reclaim agency in shaping urban environments, and to really reinforce the idea of community spaces, Black spaces, being sites of care, imagination, and self-determination. And also reinforcing the idea that it's every community has opportunities to explore how to create spaces where the community feels a sense of care, sense of nurturing. And then also one thing that we explore is the idea that architecture going beyond aesthetics and engaging with equity to create truly liberatory spaces. So just some of the sites we touched on, but also wanted to just reinforce the idea that viewing how new buildings can be reflective and responsive to layers of multiple communities and multiple individuals, and considering that this space is really a space that the Black community has inhabited and thrived in since the first European settlers came. Black people have been intertwined with that and been in on these lands. So just understanding the inclusion and the ways in which Black communities have been relate to the space that in Montreal. So thank you very much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Shane, for sharing. I'm in awe of all his incredible work. I'm sure the audience absolutely feels the same way. The visuals alone, I think many of us are visual learners. So seeing the images, it's beyond aesthetics. I've learned a lot. we're going to move into Q&A. And I do encourage that those of you who do want to ask a question, please speak clearly into the mic. We will have Tamaya going around passing it, because people at home watching through the live stream need to also be able to hear the questions. So I'd like to invite back Dami Bali to moderate our Q&A tonight, and also invite back Shane.
Hello? There we go. All right. Well, thank you, Shane, for the amazing lecture. I hope we all had a lot to learn from it, and we all had a lot to think upon while he was speaking. So I want to open the floor to anyone who might have a question for Shane.
There we go. Okay, my name is Jean-Paul Gauthier. I'm the senior legal advisor to the World Bank and UNIDO on special economic zones and spatial development initiatives. And I'm here thanks to Sylvie Baberick in communications at McGill and Lillian Rushameza, my girlfriend, who thought I might be interested in this, and I was. It's a fascinating presentation. My question to you is not about design, but it's about one of the last points that you mentioned in your final slides. And it has to do with the nexus between socially safe and sustainable spatial development planning and sort of principles of equity, community participation, inclusiveness, and so on. So I'm wondering if you can help me in what I do by sharing with us as a group, understand what are some of the principles that go beyond what we're currently seeing in terms of social safeguarding, in environmental and socio-environmental legislation, and in terms of planning. So what is sort of at the cutting edge in terms of making spatial development planning more socially inclusive, more community-oriented, more participative than it has been in terms of the frameworks that we might be familiar with? Thanks.
Yeah, no, I think really great question. I think one of the opportunities that exists is slowing down the process of consultation, and we've had both opportunities where, say, the design process, the process of considering a project is very slow and very deliberate, and sometimes there are other factors that require a very quick solution to be explored. And I think when it's never as much as often there are limited resources to engage as much as you may wish. So it's really trying to find the leaders in the community who can provide certain insights and also can provide certain sustainable initiatives that don't necessarily require as many resources. So understanding not only what the needs of the community are, but what the skills of the community are to actually support long-term sustainable development. So it's long conversations of thinking if something can actually be, can rest without those outside inputs needing to be continually refreshed. It's something that the community embraces fully. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. I actually have sort of like a follow-up question to that. When you're designing these projects and communicating with community leaders and such, like how do you measure the success and impact of your projects in those communities? Like, are there specific outcomes or endpoints that you look for to know that you've done a good job within a community? And like, that's sort of like, yeah.
And again, it's making sure that the key individuals who you're working with have, that you're working towards their goals. And sometimes working with certain organizations, certain communities may actually conflict with, it will always conflict with certain members of the community, so you need to work supporting a certain vision and ask questions to, if possible, to see if you can avoid conflicts or get in front of conflicts, and just try to plan around that. But that also takes a lot of resources to make sure that that can occur.
I see one more question from the crowd.
Thank you very much for this talk. My name is Khalid Medani. I'm the chair of African Studies here, and there's so many different questions we can all ask you. So let me just maybe ask you to elaborate on the concept of decolonization for you. And it's wonderful to see how you have addressed it in your own work with respect to building, of course, not only changing that kind of built environment in the space, but my question really is about, I'm sure you confront this daily, and that is the present built environment. I mean, what does one do when we're talking about decolonization in the context of contemporary, long-standing spaces that are, do we, just talk about them? Do we demolish them? That's very rare. But from your perspective, how do you think about that as you kind of navigate? In addition to your colleagues, I'm sure it's a daily kind of discussion and contestation. The second one has to do, of course, for me, about Africa and the kind of the medals that you were talking about. I was wondering if you can elaborate in the context of their symbolic meaning, but also in terms of materials that are also in danger, not only endanger the environment, but also are a source of particular forms of extraction. So I'm not sure if you've thought about that, because of course we can celebrate them, but we can also really debate whether they are suitable and appropriate to work with in contemporary understandings of this environment, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, that's very, very great questions. I think one response to the first question that partially touches on the second is with existing buildings you can't create a more sustainable building than a building that already exists. The embodied energy, the effort that is put into construction will always outweigh any sustainable initiatives that are added during the process of construction. So it's always inhabiting existing spaces, almost whatever they are constructed with. So concrete is a good example of a material that has significant embodied carbon, creates significant harm, but working with an existing concrete building is extremely sustainable because it is already there. You don't need to put any additional energy into constructing that. So then I think there's an element of reappropriation of space and working with the meaning of buildings and the layered histories of buildings and spaces. And I think that's one thing that I've encountered is just how do you, the ways in which individuals and communities can define spaces as their own. Is a space, and is it the architecture that has the meaning, or is it the inhabitation of the space that carries the meaning, and how do individuals and communities respond to that? And especially for looking at Black communities in Canada especially, there are very few buildings built explicitly for Black communities, or Black community organizations even. So they're almost always in found spaces, and it's about making those found spaces something significant. And yeah, to your second point about extraction, I think there are some, I think, in our work, I think in some cases, when something is, say, potentially a smaller scale or more ornamental, there's, and it's based on a craft, like sometimes there's an exploration to how an individual might create an object based on not overly extractive means, but from a larger scale, it's incredibly difficult, and it's something that we always work with to try and work outside of the structures that create extremely poor working conditions, or create extremely challenging extractive conditions. So it's, don't have a great answer, but it's incredible. It's something that you always think of, how to, when you're selecting a material, where does it come from? Where is its source? How does it affect the communities that were involved in its production and its extraction, and can you reduce that? But yeah, so it's something, yes, definitely something that is considered. I think a lot of architects are continuing to explore how that is explored.
That was an amazing question. There's one more.
Hi, my name is Derek Tanis. I'm a professor in the School of Continuing Studies, and I'm wondering about your perspective on going to that picture of the man in his kitchen and the person with the sign, on notions of gentrification and what we're calling a housing crisis. Those two different terms that we hear quite a bit in right now, housing crisis being something everyone talks about, but what do you think about it in your work? How do you see those things working?
Yeah, we haven't been involved in many housing projects. We have been critical of a lot of housing projects that have been created. One thing that has changed, and it's not always effective, but it's often done better than it had been done, especially in the 60s, is when new social housing developments are created, or when sites are designed for renewal, displacement, particularly with social housing, where a single owner who is potentially demolishing and recreating new housing on the same site. That's a particular, there's a particular approach to that, which has improved over time. But the other aspect of gentrification, displacement, there is a tension between maintaining the scale and physical built character of a neighborhood and addressing affordability. So often it's finding sites that can be densified to increase the housing supply, to allow more people to live in the neighborhood, which address the demand. So it's, really looking at how to build more housing in certain areas for broader swaths of the population that does not impact current residents in significant ways.
Yeah, the imagery in that image was very powerful for me as well. Did you have a question? Oh. Down here. Yeah, just raise your hand.
Hello? Oh, hi. My question is regarding your slides that I saw at one point, Union United Church and Little Burgundy, the NCC. And my question to you is just an opinion question, because as you know, Union United Church is the oldest Black church in Montreal, and it's been trying to do renovations over many years. I was once on the committee trying to see what renovations can be done, and your presentation about space and the architecture and everything was really interesting, because I found that that's exactly what we're going through, trying to find the right space for the Black community in this building without demolishing and reconstructing. And so I'm just wondering, we didn't end up doing a lot of renovations at all because of the building itself in the end. And I'm just wondering if, because I saw NCC, I saw Union United Church, and a lot of your diagrams were in that Little Burgundy area. So I was just wondering if you, in your studies, in your research, did you ever come across Union United Church, and what were your thoughts, and if you had any about that?
Yeah, no, Union United Church has an incredible history, many organizations. The NCC was founded in the basement of Union United Church, and it has been an incredible touch point for the Black community for well over 100 years. Any opportunities to, I think, consider how to support the spaces, I think, is something that, we could talk if you want.
I think there was another question, just in the row above. Yeah.
Thank you very much for an inspiring talk, hugely inspiring. I'm not sure my questions are coherent enough to do it justice, but it's inspired by a kind of tinge of regret that when I saw the Victorian facade of the
Wild Seed.
Wild Seed Center, yeah. I was wondering if there was a kind of regret that you didn't completely redo it. Just to elaborate, there are examples of heroic African architecture going back to, as Martin Bernal reminds us, the pyramids, or the great Zimbabwe, Timbuktu. So I'm wondering how consciousness of those heroic forms informs your work, or if at all. I'm wondering, is modernism, the modernists pretended to be less colonialist than the Victorians. Is that a kind of arrogance or misconception that is now being blown up by the postmodernists? What do you think about all of that? Thanks.
Yeah, no, great questions. I think the systems that supported modernism as well as Victorian architecture were often the same systems. So it's And then I think even the question, I think a really good question around like the architecture of Wild Seed, like where the building as a community organization, it was a building that was available, and with limited means, the transformation of the facade is not a priority. And as an architect, that's something that we're interrogating for ourselves as like, is it what the meaning of, there is definitely a conflict with the meaning of inherent in architecture, but how do we push back against that? On one project, with a similar Victorian residential building in Toronto, we considered making the rear of the building the main entrance, as it's a black space, because in the Victorian era, the idea of the back was where the black people would enter the building, so we made that more monumental and more significant, without necessarily revising the architecture of the existing, but reconfiguring the circulation, reconfiguring the idea of space. So it's playing with symbols, playing with aesthetics, playing with the idea of what the buildings represent, and pushing back, but not necessarily erasing certain elements for aesthetic means only. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think that concludes the Q&A session, and I'll pass it back to Linda. Thank you all.
Thank you both so much, and thank you for all those amazing questions. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us this evening. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, all the special guests, for your words of welcome, colleagues, my team. Thank you to Shane's family for being with us tonight as well. Big shout out to you. Let's continue to support each other in different events across the city and across campus for Black History Month. And I want to also remind you of our Black Community Gathering on February 19th for Black staff, students, and faculty. We'll have vendors, music, and just a time for us to unwind, chill, get together. Thank you all for coming tonight. Have a wonderful evening.